I feel like this whole movie was filmed with such sort of love and generosity and no judgment. It's just sort of capturing these people and the things that they do, and not a comment on what to make of it. Yeah. Like there's no judgment or point of view. It's just sort of like lovingly observed.
Tell me a little bit about sort of how did you know Annie Baker at all before she approached you for this project?
Yes, I knew of Annie Baker because when she was putting Circle Mirror Transformation on at Playwrights Horizons, I was doing a play called This by Melissa James Gibson, directed by Daniel Locken, which was an amazing experience. And so those two things were very well received and happening at the same time. So there was this really sort of fun, joyful community that was happening there. And then I would see anything that she did. I so went to see her Uncle Vanya and The Flick, and most recently Infinite Life. Like, I just think she's an incredible talent. So I was really excited to get the opportunity to work with her.
So tell me a little bit about sort of how she described this character to you, how she sort of like brought Janet to you, and then how you sort of started to interpret Janet yourself.
Well, we discovered when we first met, I didn't know what the story was. We just met as I knew she had written a script and she wanted to meet with me. And we discovered in that first sit-down meeting that basically I moved to Western Mass when I was 7 years old, right in the same, basically where this film was made. Yeah. And my mom was an herbalist, and so a similar sort of community, and it was very familiar to me on the page from growing up there. And so we started there, and then we talked about our own mothers. Janet is not like either one of our mothers, but there were qualities to them and qualities to maybe friends of our moms that we could sort of talk about a lot and discover for Janet.
Well, I was wondering, did she have sort of, coming from the world of theater, did she have sort of a rehearsal process that was unlike any that you'd experienced in film before, or was it more, or did she take it more sort of in a different direction?
We didn't have a huge amount of rehearsal time, but what we did have is a year from when I knew I was going to be doing it to when we started filming. So we have countless texts and exchanges of pictures and memories and books and songs. And so we had that. So it's sort of very organically, the seeds were planted. And then I feel like it just had a year to kind of quietly grow.
So tell me a little bit about, what happened when she introduced Zoe into the mix, Zoe Ziegler, who plays Lacey, and is such a wonderful discovery. So at what point did you meet Zoe, and how did you sort of start developing that relationship?
So we met, I think probably, I don't know, maybe 2 months before we started filming, or 6 weeks. Annie had spent a year searching for her Lacey, from child professional actors to just schools to county fairs to approaching people on the street. I mean, she just no stone was left unturned. And I first read with a couple of other young actors in California, and he came out, and that wasn't exactly right. And then she had met Zoe, and so I flew to New York to read with her here. And then which, I mean, she's sort of such a discovery from the first reading. And then Annie just said the casting person had filmed it on her iPhone, and she said just watching that back, there's just always so much going on behind Zoe's eyes, Lacey's eyes. She was hugely relieved as filming was sort of weeks away at that point, that we found her. And for me, I always find now when I play the mom of a young actor, I think it's very important to create or begin a relationship before you get to set. So often always I reach out to the parents and just say hi and try to find out a little bit about their person. And, you know, presents go a long way. So like whether it just be like literally a book of Mad Libs or a hat or something, it's like a first step into sort of, you know, I don't know,
You give Zoe.
a sweatshirt with a horse on it. She's a huge horse person.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got her a sweatshirt, and then also we brought Uno. I brought Uno, which she had never played before. So we introduced her to the game of Uno. So we just played hours of Uno. But it's really fun, and it's just a way to be together that's not like acting. It's just like creating a relationship. And so when the cameras are then rolling, when you're looking at each other, you know each other.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering, about that because there is this sort of mother-daughter intimacy that both in the context of the screenplay, which is incredible, and just on screen that is so rare to see. And so I was wondering, beyond like what did it feel like then once the cameras were rolling between you two, and how did you did it just feel completely natural sliding from playing Uno to being talking to each other in bed?
It really did. There were two very different experiences. You know, the character of Lacey is not Zoe. Zoe is not playing herself. It's very much a different character. But it's something, sometimes I feel like it's just kind of indescribable or magic that happens when the cameras are rolling. And so it's sort of trying to create a relationship beforehand and then just seeing what happens when someone says action.
Well, speaking of relationships, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about did you film each section sort of independently? And if you could talk a little bit about sort of the relationships how you sort of work them out with Will Patton, Elias Koteas, and Sofia Canedo.
Right. First of all, I just felt so lucky to work with each one of them. I mean, they're so incredible and very different actors. And we did have the good fortune of being able to film them first. Will was there for, I don't know what, 10 days, 2 weeks, and then Sophie, and then Elias. And so it's just sort of being open and sort of taking the temperature of what you feel like each actor needs there. They each come with their own, histories and personalities, and it's sort of finding the places to connect. But it was joyful. I loved starting off with Will in particular because he and Annie already have a shorthand, having worked together before. So there was already a relationship in place and a safety in place, and he was just a joy to sort of kick off the show with. And he was also very good at Uno. He was very happy to get in the grass and play Uno. Yes.
Well, I mean, you said get in the grass. Tell me a little bit about, this is an area that you grew up in. So tell me about returning there to film and just sort of how you are inhabiting this environment on the shoot.
It was hugely moving every day to be in that part of the world because I moved there with my mom and my younger sister. When we left Boston and we moved into this little cabin in the woods with no electricity or running water with the man who became my stepfather. And so it was a very sort of tumultuous and big deal in a young girl's life. I was 7 at the time. But when I look back at that time and where I lived, it was a very innocent, beautiful upbringing. And so it was only with fondness that I returned. And, it was so amazing to bring my kids there and go swim in the ponds and the lakes that I swam in growing up. And we went up past where I used to live and went to bookstores and the public library and, where we got pizza and ice cream. And I mean, I was basically it was intense. I never dreamed that I would have an opportunity to go back and inhabit that world and that place again. It was pure joy.
Of traveling back in time in a way, which must have been surreal as well.
It was totally surreal experience from start to finish, and I think I'm still processing it.
Well, I was wondering if can you tell me a little bit about sort of your interpretation of Janet and, especially as a character who we're seeing sort of perceived a lot, we're seeing her through the eyes of Lacey. So I was wondering how that affected you and affected your performance, and your own sort of perception of her.
I feel like I agree. That was Annie's job. Yeah. I didn't have to worry about that. I just had to play the person, and then how that was captured was, I left that to Annie and Maria, our wonderful DP. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of, you mentioned sort of drawing from women you knew, and how did you sort of, how did you sort of put her together? Was there sort of a sense of like, understanding who this woman was? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of how you developed maybe her, either maybe backstory is the wrong word, but sort of the whole of her that we don't even see on screen.
Yeah, I think there are little clues in the writing about it, which were hugely helpful. And then it was also just knowing I'm 10 years older than Annie, so I was there. So our experience was, at a different time, but still a similar world. And I feel like, especially in the sort of 80s and 90s, that, the world of acupuncturists or herbalists or chiropractors, it was still very much like an alternative lifestyle. And I feel like there are many people who embraced that and were sort of, serious thinkers and with, on their path. But I think there were a lot of people also who were lost and searching for a community and trying to find it within there. So it felt like I knew like some people in my mom's world, like I felt like there were qualities that some of them had that I could feel in Janet, like the being lost and searching and, yeah.
What is Annie like as a director? Obviously, she's an incredible writer, but I was wondering sort of what she was like on set as a director.
Annie knows very clearly, or has in mind very clearly, what she likes and what she wants, but she's also incredibly collaborative and open to being surprised. But she's also one of the most detail-oriented directors I've ever worked with, in the best way. Like everything you see on screen, she would have handpicked it. Sometimes a director will say, like, Phil, just put the books on the library. I mean, if she didn't like bring every single title herself, she would have told someone else to get it. There's no detail that happened by accident. From a blanket on the bed to like a cream on the bureau to the book on a shelf. And I loved that specificity of place.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of filming that fight with Sophie, and sort of the intoxicated night that leads to this discussion, because it's such a wonderful scene.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very hot that summer in Massachusetts. It was like 95 degrees. And so I think that sort of informed that evening, especially, when it's that hot. I feel that in the city too, when it gets like 95, 98. Everybody slows down, everybody moves in a different way. And I think that was part of it, sort of trying to like take what you could within the environment and sort of heighten it for yourself to sort of give the impression of, being under the influence in some way. And then it was just like, Annie's words are so beautiful, and it felt like a moment of real revelation, and Janet really knowing herself, where I feel like so much of the movie she's sort of removed a little bit, and it felt like a real moment of like getting to know her.
Yeah. I was wondering, obviously you're just observing this scene, but sort of the puppets and the performance aspect is so incredible. And so I was wondering what just that moment was like on set as you're sort of watching this unfold.
I just felt like Annie cast a spell from start to finish, and those sort of creatures were just one other example of the magic of the spell that she cast. Those puppets are so beautiful. Again, she was in communication with Jeremy, I can't remember her last name, who designed the puppets. Like, it's something that Annie, I believe, remembers from her childhood. I didn't have puppets in my life like that, but it was so fun to go to that place and sit on those blankets, and it just felt like such a throwback to me of like 1986. It was just like, oh my God, we're really doing this. And I just thought you don't see that very often, so it's always fun to see something different on screen, I think.
What about contra dancing? Have you ever contra danced before?
I think I have. Yeah, my mom, my stepfather was a woodworker, so I remember we had like a house raising weekend where because he built their house, and then everybody came and built the house, and it's very witness. Brought potluck, and then at the end there was like a contra dance where everybody came together and danced. So, what I love about Annie is that I feel like this whole movie was filmed with such sort of love and generosity and no judgment. It's just sort of capturing these people and the things that they do, and not a comment on what to make of it. Yeah. Like there's no judgment or point of view. It's just sort of like lovingly observed.
Yeah. To that point, I was
no irony.
Yeah. Oh no.
which I kind of love. Like humor, but no irony.
I was wondering if you could talk about, like occupying this house. There are these, unbroken shots, just sort of them existing. And so what was that like?
I feel, well, this script, when I read it, was 70 pages. And Annie's first edit was 2.5 hours, which was too long. So for her, I think most...
A flick.
Yes, exactly. Most scripts, like one page equals 1 minute of screen time. And so this was basically, hers is like 1 page equals like 2 minutes of screen time. So I knew a lot of the discovery of who these characters were come in the quiet moments, in the moments that aren't written, and sort of finding them in their place, in their most intimate place.
Yeah. Was there stage directions for that? Was there how did that sort of, how did you discover that, when you were in the moment?
Probably some of it was scripted, but some of it was also just discovered on the day. Yeah. And then also it's her just encouraging people taking their time and trusting their impulses and going where they want to go.
Yeah. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about, is there a particular scene that you remember with Zoe about, and how you sort of approached it, how you sort of figured out, how to define their relationship through, for the camera?
I feel like those bed scenes were hugely informative to the rest of their like all the other times you see them together. I feel like because there's no pretense, there's nobody else around. It's just them both, and they're most sort of open with each other. And I think that sort of then informs the smaller conversations. But I feel like they're sort of revealing themselves to each other all the time, and their history. I watched it last night with my family, which was very sweet. They'd never gone to a premiere or a screening with me before, so it was very nice to have them with me. And I thought that about the antibiotics. That really jumped out at me. There's sort of,
90s.
It's so 90s. But they're constantly, the sort of the boundaries sort of being blurred between mother and daughter and intimates was really interesting to me.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned sort of working with Will. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of Sophie and Elias and, sort of figuring out Janet's dynamic between their characters as well.
Well, Sophie just came, and she is, she's not Regina, but she comes with so much energy and life, and that was such a joy, and to have that sort of different energy come in. And it was fun to get to know her as Janet and Regina are sort of reconnecting, and it just felt really fun. And then Elias was really intense, really serious, and really committed to his belief in every word that he said. And I've always been a fan of his. I think he's an amazing sort of underappreciated actor that just knocks it out of the park anytime the camera's on him. So it was really fun to just be with him, and all three of them are just so present. Yeah. And so that's just a joy to sit opposite from.
Yeah. I was wondering if you talk a little bit about sort of, inhabiting this, world of the semi-recent past through costume, through sort of set. What was that like, sort of stepping into the clothes of Janet in this era?
You definitely had to check your vanity. I feel like I think that they did. One thing about Annie too is she wants it to be in this period, but she doesn't want anything to sort of scream it. It's always about sort of subtlety and finding it in the most sort of relaxed way. Yeah. So I love the wardrobe in this film. I think Lizzie did an incredible job, and sort of I believe every moment and what everyone's wearing without sort of signaling that it's happening at another time.
Yeah. I mean, what about the environment? You mentioned sort of, this idea that, you grew up in this, but there's so many sort of incredible shots of them just walking through this woods around their house. And so, I mean, what was that like? What was the experience of shooting that like?
It's so beautiful there, especially in the summers, just big open skies and big fluffy clouds, and just I was like, okay, so great. I'm going to move back to Massachusetts. Is that what's happening? Actually, my daughter watched it with me yesterday too, and she was like, I have to go to college there. So it's like, it's just a beautiful part of the world that it's a little bit, even though there's those, there are wonderful universities there, and I think people know of it sort of in the background, but it's a really beautiful and kind of undiscovered part of the world. Like, it's not the Berkshires. It's a different place from that, close, but not the same thing. And it just is such a huge part of the movie, and just kind of a magical place.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I was, we have to wrap up, but I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about, sort of, I guess, what you think Annie sort of brought to life in this woman that you maybe haven't seen before, or hadn't been even asked to play before.
I felt like it was a really deep dive look at a complicated woman who has made mistakes and has had deep disappointments, but is still doing the best that she can. I'll also say, like, her greatest wish is to just mine the truth, warts and all. I was going through our texts recently just because I had to talk to someone about her, and one of them that I came across right before we were filming, I had this period of getting styes in my eye, and they were so painful and ugly. And I had one right before we were filming, and it wouldn't go away. So I was taking pictures and sending them to her. And and one of the texts that caught my eye the other day was in all caps, "Keep the stye for Janet." It's not about, it's just warts and all. And I love that. It's not about entertainment necessarily, or making things look prettier than they do in real life. It's really sort of mining sort of the ugly beauty of being a person.
Well, thank you so much, Julianne.
My
and
pleasure.
thank you all so much for being
you.
here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.